नेशनल इंस्टीट्यूट ऑफ प्रोफेशनल लर्निंग में आपका स्वागत है।
Okay, now on to the world of filters and special effects here inside Photoshop. As you can see, I've closed out of my open images. I collapsed down the panels on the right-hand side. What I want you to do is I want you to go and get your hands on an image. Some kind of an image. It doesn't even really matter exactly which image you use. I think I'm going to go back to windows.jpg myself. You can grab that guy. You can grab something that you may have of your own kicking around. That would be perfectly fine. Of course, this exercise is all about getting started with filters inside Photoshop. And I would say that filters is really one of those things that Photoshop is known for. So let's get started with a quick look at filters here, and then, of course, in the upcoming exercises, we'll go further with our filters. So here's the deal. We have our image opened up. We can head to the filter menu, and all of the options that we see here, 3D, blur, blur gallery, all the way down to other, these are all of our Photoshop filters. Okay? Now, I'm going to introduce you to a handful of these guys to help you get started. I think really the best way for you to get comfortable with filters is to explore them on your own. But I'll help you get started here. And most of the filters, by the way, work in a very similar fashion. They're all going to have a very similar dialog box and a similar interface. So let's get started here maybe with a blur. So I'm going to go blur, and then I'm going to go over to radial blur. Okay, so go ahead and choose that guy if you're following me along here. There we go. So here's the radial blur interface. Lots of options here. Usually you get some kind of a preview inside these filter dialog boxes, and usually a series of sliders and options related to working with the special effect or the filter itself. Okay, so we're adding in here a zoom blur, or we could go spin, something like this. We have some quality options as well. And again, as I say, rather than me going through every single filter with a fine-tooth comb here with you, I think it's best for you to experiment and kind of discover a lot of these on your own. Okay? So there we go. I'm just kind of throwing in some settings here with a spin as far as my blur method is concerned. I'll go ahead and click on OK. And then what's going to wind up happening is the filter or the special effect is going to be applied to my image, just like so. Okay? So there you go. Pretty cool stuff. Now, I'm going to go ahead and undo this, Controller-Command-Z on my keyboard. That's the first filter that we've seen. Let's go and check out another one here. This is kind of a cool one. I'm going to go back to Filter, and then I'm going to go down to Stylize, all the way down to Stylize. Here's another fun one that we could use, Emboss, or actually any one of these really is pretty cool stuff. But I'm going to show you Emboss here. And what we can do is we can make our photograph appear as if it's embossed on paper. Okay? Now, this filter is a little bit different because it's giving us a live preview inside of our image. The actual filter interface has a preview window, but honest to goodness, a lot of these preview windows, I think I alluded to this in an earlier exercise, much earlier on, these preview windows are kind of useless. I usually go with the actual document window, if that makes sense. And usually you'll have some kind of a preview checkbox in some of these filters. Not always, though. We didn't have one with the radial blur, for instance. All right, now, as far as the emboss is concerned, I can set the angle. So, in other words, the lighting angle for the emboss effect, the height of the emboss effect, or imagine this is almost the depth of the embossing, and then, of course, the amount as well. So, there's really no right or wrong here. We're just having some fun, throwing some special effects onto our images. When we're happy with them, we can go ahead and click on OK to apply them to the image. Now, I do want to say here, as I hit my undo one more time, Controller-Command-Z on my keyboard, I want to say here that these filters at this point are destructive. Once again, just like the color correction commands that we saw earlier, I apply a blur or a stylize filter to my image. For example, this time I'll go back down to stylize, but this time I'll go extrude, something like this, and then maybe I'll wind up taking the defaults, or maybe I'll throw in some different settings here and click on OK. This is a permanent change on my image. If I save the image and close them out and open them up tomorrow, this is what he's going to open up as. I've destroyed the image. Okay, so be very careful with this stuff. There's no going back. Okay? Now, a lot of these filters, too, I have to say, and I don't mean to take the wind out of your sails, they're a lot of fun, but that's kind of where it ends. Where the heck am I going to use these in an actual real-world project? Maybe once in a while, but by themselves, usually you're not going to use them all too often. They're a lot of fun to explore and go through and try them out and so on, but that's about kind of where they end, unless you start mixing a few of them together or unless there's a specific effect you're after. So what if we wanted to create sort of a film grain effect? What if I wanted to make this photograph look as if it were photographed on some grainy film stock, something like that? Well, you could go to your filter menu and then down to noise. This is one of my favorites. And then over to add noise. You could do this. And here's our noise, by the way. And we should be getting a preview in there because my preview option there is marked off. But I'm not getting a whole lot of an effect here inside my image window until I start cranking up the amount. There we go, something like this. So there's kind of this grainy film effect here. I usually wind up going Gaussian for the distribution and monochromatic, something like this. Now, that's a lot of grain there. So maybe I'll try and tone it down a little bit. Maybe something like that. A very subtle effect there, something like this. And then I'll go ahead and click on OK. All right? So there you go. So I guess the point that I'm trying to make here is some of these filters have more wow than actual practical purpose. Other filters might actually have a purpose. There's a set of filters, by the way, just while I think of it here, called the sharpen filters. And unsharp mask, this guy down here, oftentimes would be used for an image that's a little bit blurry. It's more of a corrective filter rather than a special effect. Okay? Now, check this out. Before we move on, I want to throw a couple of interesting keyboard options at you here. I'm going to undo, this is the film grain that I'm back on here, right? I'm going to undo the film grain effect. What I could do is I could hit Control or Command F on my keyboard to replay the last filter that I used. Notice the film grain effect is now back onto my image, okay? Or what I could do is I could hold down Command and Option here on the Mac or Control and Alt on the Windows side and hit F on my keyboard. And that will open up the dialog box for the last filter that I had used. Okay? Now, interestingly, note that what I've done here is I'm actually going to be applying noise onto an image that already has noise applied to it. So I can actually layer my filters on top of one another if I wanted to. But I'm going to go and cancel this out. Last but not least, from the filter drop-down menu, the last filter that you've used is available from the filter drop-down menu, very first option there. There's a bunch of other filter commands that we have in here which we're going to be exploring in the upcoming exercises, namely smart filters and also the filter gallery. Before we get to these two guys, though, make sure you're comfortable with some of the other filters that we have available to us inside the filter menu.